scouring the World Trade Center wreckage for victims, including hundreds of their colleagues missing, presumed dead.
We were there until 3 o'clock in the morning, but it's like Planet of the Apes. You got 200 guys dead. Whoever did it, they should kill the bastards that did it, period.
What does it do to you knowing that there are 200 of your brothers dead under there?
It says 200 guys. The guy that relieved me is dead. I can't do it.
New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, conflicting earlier accounts, says only 4 people have been pulled from the rubble alive. 2 police officers, a firefighter, and then this afternoon,
a woman who was found still alive, taken to the hospital. So now there are at least 4 people that we've been able to take out. We're searching for others.
Addressing the nation for the 4th time in 2 days, the president says the attacks
were more than acts of terror. They were acts of war.
And tonight the country is on a war footing. Military troops patrolling the nation's capital.
That U-Haul over there.
National Guardsmen on the streets of New York. A Navy aircraft carrier, the USS George Washington, off Long Island. The stock market shut down until at least Friday. Airports still closed. Only a few planes, diverted after Tuesday's attacks, allowed to fly. In Manhattan, as the wind shifts, the cloud of smoke drifts north, the sawdust-like powder choking rescue workers and passers-by. And late today, what emergency workers fear most, the heap of rubble that remained from the World Trade Center's South Tower collapses. Authorities afraid that even as this rescue proceeds cautiously, still more lives could be lost. So again, that is why the rescue workers have been evacuated. Looking at a live picture again of the 50-story One Liberty Plaza. Authorities telling us that one of the buildings may be buckled, the other may have a crack in it. A very dangerous situation here tonight, and especially making the rescue efforts, which have been going on so cautiously, so laboriously, that much slower this evening. Tom.
Thanks very much, NBC's David Bloom. Over my shoulder, you can see the scene of Lower Manhattan looking across New York Harbor. Now we want to show you the reverse of all of this. This from Midtown New York, an eerie view of one of the world's most celebrated urban skylines, New York City. That is the Empire State Building in the foreground. And of course, the dust and the debris and the smoke from Lower Manhattan continue to obscure our view. The twilight of another day in the city of New York. But of course, it is not the twilight for the city and the people who are determined to make a comeback from this terrible devastation that has been visited upon them by terrorists. We struggle to come to grip with all of this. New proof tonight of the enormity of these attacks. A Columbia University seismograph, which usually monitors earthquakes, showed the shock waves created when the World Trade Towers collapsed. That's about 2.4 on the Richter scale. It's the size of a minor earthquake. And above ground, New York might never look the same. This is a graphic representation of New York's famous skyline before, now, after. We won't see it for real until the ban on helicopters is lifted. But up in space yesterday, crystal clear views of the huge plume of smoke and debris sent up into the sky by the attacks. So it was an attack that was in fact enormous in its magnitude, and the enormity is being felt tonight, the devastating effect on so many people. Back here in New York, the huge effort to find anyone still alive in the rubble continues nonstop. There are a few successes to report, but the outlook is very, very grim. NBC's Rahima Ellis joins us with the latest.
At Ground Zero today, firefighters on the front line still spraying the smoldering wreckage more than a day after the explosion. Working all through the night, hundreds of rescue teams picking through the rubble, but it's tough, slow work. There are literally mountains of debris here. The soot alone is 2 feet deep. The air is filled with choking dust. Power saws cutting through steel, blow torches slicing mangled girders. Though the chances of getting anyone out alive are now fading, there is still determination.
I've seen a couple of police officers, a couple of firefighters, a couple of civilians. There's a lot of people being pulled down.
Rescue teams from across New England and the mid-Atlantic states are working in 12-hour shifts. But most don't want to quit, even when their shift is done. They don't want to give up.
We work here, the other rescuers work there, and we all work as a team, so everybody's working as hard as we can. And
Yeah, these guys would work till they drop to get people out.
The emergency workers behind me are waiting their turn to go into the rubble. It is hard to imagine that what is on the other side of these workers is what is left of the World Trade Towers. You can see a portion of the archway that literally connected the two towers. It is crumbled now and on the ground. And just a few blocks, 2 to 3 blocks away, what was the top of this 110-story tower is now collapsed, and it looks like a structure that's arching out of the ground.
It's a mess. It's like your worst nightmare. You could never even believe what it's like in it.
Did you want to come?
Oh, of course, everybody does. We're going to need everybody because it's going to take a long time.
Even after more than a day at the heart of an unthinkable disaster, all the firefighters like Robert Fithian want to do is keep working to make certain no one is left behind. Rahima Ellis, NBC News in Lower Manhattan.
And if you would like to know how you may be able to help out, you can log on to msnbc.com, and on that online site you'll be able to find places where your assistance would be greatly appreciated. Now let's go to the medical battle to save the victims of the bombing. With that story, NBC's Robert Bazell joining us tonight from St. Vincent Hospital, the main medical staging area for the crisis. And Robert, we can only call it a bombing because, in fact, those 2 airlines were used as bombs, and they were heavily loaded with fuel. Are severe burns still the problem, or are we now into major trauma injuries?
Well, we've had both, of course, Tom, and the burns occurred earlier on in the day. This hospital, St. Vincent's, is the trauma center closest to the World Trade Center, and ambulances have still been coming in here at the rate of a few a day. And this trauma center can treat every type of injury except for severe burns, and those are taken uptown. New York Presbyterian Hospital has the largest burn center in the country, filled today with 21 victims of the explosion, many unrecognizable with burns over 70 to 90% of their bodies.
The patients that we're seeing coming in, their burns are just horrible, and the majority of them cannot talk. And if we do get somebody who talks, we immediately get their name.
Nurses and doctors struggle to stabilize the patients.
Her pips were climbing today up into the near 50 range, 48, 50.
Dr. Roger Yurt, head of the unit, says the first 24 hours are the most crucial.
They actually lose so much fluid that they go into shock. And so we have to give large amounts of fluid, get them through that first 24 hours. And then after that, it's concerns for infection and getting their wounds to heal.
Brian Reeves, a security supervisor for a financial firm in the Trade Center, burned over 30% of his body. His wife, Jewel, and his 7-year-old son, Brighton, at his bedside today. He says thoughts of them helped him save himself.
Explosion came right through the window and broke the window, and it knocked me down. And I was in, but when I opened my eyes, I was right there in between the fire. I just saw my son's face and just got up, yelled, and ran.
Reeves is one of the lucky ones here. Many others not expected to live.
It's difficult. You have to remain detached to some extent, because if you did concentrate on some of the misery and the deformity that occurs, you wouldn't be able to do your job.
Still, the hospital president says his staff is eager.
We've had people volunteering for overnight shifts, volunteering everything from their bodies to help work, to giving blood, to being here at night, to giving their homes, their mattresses, their food.
A valiant effort to help the most critically injured.
As of this evening, Tom, this hospital and others in the area have treated about a total of 2,200 people. That's a lot of injured, of course, but it's a very small number compared to the expected number of dead. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's chief science correspondent Robert Bazell, who is a journalistic authority on medical matters, of course. And we hate to keep coming back to this number, but there are estimates that as many as 10 to 15, perhaps as many as 20,000 people were in the World Trade Center at the time that the Twin Towers came down. Tonight there's a surprising piece of news out of the White House. Administration officials are claiming that Air Force One and the White House itself were in fact targets of the terrorist attacks, and that explains some of the president's diversionary action yesterday, flying from Florida to Louisiana and then on to Omaha. NBC's Campbell Brown is at her post in Washington tonight. Campbell, what's the latest there?
Well, Tom, the president has been facing criticism from both Democrats and Republicans for being away from Washington in the aftermath of the attacks. Well, tonight, the White House is on the defensive. Officials here claiming now that the president's life was in danger, but offering little information to back up that claim. Today, as the president gathers with his national security team to plan the U.S. response, administration officials make a startling announcement.
We have real incredible information that the airplane that landed at the Pentagon was originally intended to hit the White House.
According to military sources, the plane, which took off from Dulles Airport, first flew past the Pentagon, heading instead for the U.S. Capitol. The plane flew over the Capitol, then circled toward the White House. Officials say its intended target. What's unclear, why the plane kept going, crashing finally into the Pentagon. Officials also say Air Force One was a target, information they learned as the president was en route from Florida to Louisiana's Barksdale Air Force Base. That's why they say the president was shuttled to yet another Air Force base in Nebraska, with fighter jets escorting the plane. But what exactly was the threat?
I'm not indicating what form it came in, John, and it will not.
Today, as new information about the attacks pours in, the president signals the administration's first priority to make sure the rest of the world supports the U.S. in whatever action Bush decides to take.
This enemy attacked not just our people, but all freedom-loving people everywhere in the world. The United States of America will use all our resources to conquer this enemy. We will rally the world.
At the White House today, security eases somewhat. Tourists are allowed back in. The First Lady visits with victims of the Pentagon attack at a local hospital. In a show of unity, the president invites congressional leaders from both parties to the White House and asks for their support in funding relief efforts. The nasty budget fight for the moment forgotten as Democrats pledge their help.
It is our strong desire to do this not as Republicans or Democrats, but as Americans.
Now, regarding the White House claim that Air Force One was a target, officials here were asked the question today, do they believe that the plane that crashed in Pittsburgh may have been the plane targeting Air Force One? Officials would only say that they have no information about the mission of that fourth plane. Tom?
All right, NBC's Campbell Brown at the White House tonight. Now let's go to the Pentagon, still reeling from the attack that killed perhaps as many as 200 people yesterday. Military officials are working tonight on a plan to retaliate, and they're trying to reorganize themselves in the midst of all of their grieving as well. NBC's Jim Miklaszewski joins me once again from the Pentagon. Jim?
Tom, tonight, rescue workers here have given up all hope of finding anyone else alive as the Pentagon becomes one giant crime scene. An army of FBI agents descends on Ground Zero, gathering up bits and pieces of possible evidence. But 24 hours after the attack here, nerves remain on razor's edge. The mere sight of a large plane in the distance sends people running for cover. The scene remains grim. There are no signs of life detected beneath the tons of rubble. The area remains too unstable for rescue workers to even get close. But there's little hope anyone is left alive. The Pentagon now estimates that between 150 to 200 people are killed, including those aboard the plane that slammed into the Pentagon. Tracy Rowenhorst's husband, Edward, worked for the Army and is among the missing.
Mostly I'm just here in case he comes out and that I can be somewhere in the vicinity where I can get to him.
Tonight, the U.S. military is on the move. Warplanes continue to patrol the skies over 41 major U.S. cities as the aircraft carrier George Washington arrives off the coast of New York to provide security and medical assistance. And in a videotaped message to the troops, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld pledges swift and sure retaliation.
We face powerful and terrible enemies, enemies we intend to vanquish, so that moments of horror like yesterday will be stopped.
Osama bin Laden remains the prime suspect. Pentagon officials tell NBC News if there's enough evidence to link him to the attacks, the Bush administration is prepared to move quickly and aggressively. The sources suggest these would not be the kind of pinprick missile strikes that have failed to get bin Laden in the past, but an all-out military campaign designed to capture or eliminate the Saudi-born terrorists. In addition, the military campaign could be aimed at the Afghanistan's ruling party, the Taliban, for harboring bin Laden. Such an effort would require a military commitment the Clinton White House would not make, and a willingness to accept a large number of American military casualties. After yesterday's devastating terrorist attacks, former General Norman Schwarzkopf says it's a sacrifice the American people are willing to make.
I think the American public is angry now, and I think they're going to get more angry
rather than less angry. I think they're going to expect action to be taken.
That kind of support evident tonight as rescue workers unfurl a huge American flag on the roof of the Pentagon.